to a special edition Barmy Army Podcast. Today we're joined by Deb Dillworth from the FSA, as ever joined by Nat. Thank you for joining us, both of you. First of all, we're going to start off, as the Barmy Army, Nat and I and Shane, Mark, we've talked about the FSA and our involvement, but Deb, can you just give us, to start us off, a little bit of information about you, what you do, and what the FSA does as well, please?
Yeah, hi. So I am Debs. I am the EFL and Women's Game Network Manager for the Football Supporters Association. The Football Supporters Association is the national supporters body for England and Wales. We are comprised of supporters groups, trusts, diversity groups and individual members, and we have about 300 groups as members. So Barmy Army is part of the Women's Network, which is a newly organised network to talk about the women's game locally and nationally. So it's really important for me. I'm super passionate about the women's game, and it was really important to try to start to organise and mobilise together to get a collective voice, as well as recognising some of the fantastic work that's being done locally for different supporters groups. So it's an exciting time, really.
Yeah, definitely. Nat, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, so Deb, she talks about the Women's Network a bit. What is it, say, if you were just a brand new to women's football and you hear someone saying the Women's Network, what is it, who is in it, and what do we expect maybe from the network?
So yeah, we're a growing network. It's a fairly new one. So the Football Supporters Association is quite a new organisation in name. We are a merged organisation from Supporters Direct and the Football Supporters Federation. So Supporters Direct originally looked after Supporters Trust, and they're financially regulated groups that work across the England and Wales, and then the Football Supporters Federation did a lot of like campaigning, 20s, plenty, that kind of thing. Both were member organisations, and then they merged together. So when they merged, I saw an opportunity to go, right, we can try to really push on and establish the Women's Network. So when it was the World Cup last year, I decided to pitch to try to run a fans embassy across in France. Traditionally the FSF had run them for 20 years for the men's game, but never for the women's game. So I was like, right, got my elbows out, decided to go and pitch, and luckily they said yes, and were really, really behind the idea. That really, for me, was the way to sort of see what the appetite was in terms of supporters that were going, interested in the women's game and going across. It really showcased some activity and appetite to start to do something on the national level here. So since then, since August when I arrived back, we talked to absolutely shed loads of supporters. So since then we've tried to encourage supporters groups to grow and get on board with the network. So there was already some supporters groups set up, and it was just a case of trying to start to encourage them to think about how supporters can be represented on a national level as well. So realistically, the Women's Network at the minute is brand new. So as I've said to most of the groups, I think you guys included, it's sort of very fluid at the minute. I'm trying to work on 3 different tracks along with the group. So one is to provide the volunteers that are running these groups the opportunity to upskill, to sort of understand the variety of issues and to network. We want to ensure that from an internal perspective, the network is formally constituted as soon as possible. So that means that then there would be representation on the National Council internally for the FSA. And then we're trying to work with the FA to sort of carve out how voice and supporter representation is being put across on a national level. So that's the kind of women's network, and it's very fluid at the minute, but I'm really excited because we've got lots of different groups involved. I think we're at 12 now, so it's from none to 12. I'm really pleased with, and it shows an appetite in the women's game.
Definitely.
Before we move on, because we asked our members for some questions, so we'll move on to those in a minute, but let's thinking more about us. So Nat and I obviously know the answer to this question. What have you had a role in? What have you helped the Barmy Army to do up to now?
Yeah, so I think we met last year in Manchester, and I just reached out to you guys to sort of say, hey, this is the vision that I have. What do you think of what we're trying to do in terms of a national voice? I think it was a case of like trying to reassure people about who the FSA are. We're a not-for-profit organisation. Membership is free, and we're just trying to make sure that supporters are represented across the board on lots of different issues. It's not just a case of being marketed to or being asked whether your pie's cold. You can have a say on lots of different things. So in terms of you guys, I think we sort of had conversations about where you want to go as a supporters group, what your aims and missions are, and then I never swoop in and try to change anything. I just try and offer you different options, different ways forwards, and then hopefully support on those things. We've looked at our constitution, so tried to offer help and support in terms of like formalising and tried to speak about how that can help when you go in and talking to clubs. You know, because it is a two-way street. You know, we can't just expect everything from a club and then not have external boxes ourselves to try to professionalise in some sort of way. Because at the end of the day, we're encouraging people to be a critical friend, not just critical. You know, you guys exist because you want to better the team and the club. So, you know, it's a case of like how best to do that. So yeah, we've talked about a few different things, haven't we, really, different options. And it's been amazing to sort of see some of the work you've been doing during the pandemic and like the community that you've got. You know, and it's really rewarding for me to sort of see that fan activism. It's amazing. So yeah, but it seems like a long time ago since we met.
Well, I hope you don't mind, Deb. I was skeptical. I was thinking, who are you? Why do you want to speak to us? Like I said, we're a new fan group anyway. So when we came in, people might not have received us the right way, but I think you put our mind at ease with that as well. And just like you said, not trying to change anything.
No. I think as well, it's like, it's good if people question us. Like we are a member organisation, so we exist, you know, our members are pivotal to us. So it's like anybody that's cautious is understandable. But all I can do is try and reach out to as many people as possible and sort of explain what we are trying to do. We do have established networks in the EFL, the Premier League, community-owned clubs, the National League. So we cover quite a lot of different bases. They are more structured, and as I said to you in the first meeting, it's not like I want to just go, right, that happens in the men's game, so this is definitely going to happen in the women's game. And that's the beauty of our network at the minute. It's like super collaborative. You know, everybody's like striving towards the women's game being better and greater and having more supporters. So that's the fun thing about it, is this kind of fluid, so we can sort of decide where it goes. But yeah, I think the skepticism is okay, and it's like people can come and ask me questions and I'll try and help as best as possible. And there's no pressure. Like hopefully you guys didn't feel pressured to join in, but equally I think you saw my vision. You know, so yeah.
Deb's got a few of the membership questions that I think people have.
Yeah, we asked our members if there's anything they wanted to raise, and I think because there was a bit of confusion as to who and what the FSA are, we might find that some of these questions aren't always relevant, but they're talking points and they're what's affecting the fans. So should we take it in turns, Nat?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to go first or?
Do the first one.
Okay. Right. We've got no names on these, so it's any of our members. Will there be an opportunity for a couple of representatives from each club to meet with an FA representative, so that a fans council that will come together sharing ideas for how to grow and improve the women's game in particular?
So I love this question. I love it so much because it's part of my plan, and is part of the network's plan. So basically at the minute we are a brand new network. You know, we've not been running for that long, but we are making waves to try to show that we're an active network, and then also to try to build relationships with the FA. So the plan is to, just before COVID, obviously it was slightly different now with COVID because there's pushed back a lot of things back, but the plan is to ideally have 1 or 2 meetings a year with the FA and supporter reps from our member network, and then have some meetings that are just for supporters reps. So that would follow a similar track to what we do in the men's game. just because I do think that's a good place to start, to try to establish those meetings with the FA. And it's important that it covers, we contribute to the agenda and we have as much say as they do. So it's very much a structured dialogue. It's not just an FA led thing. So hopefully the topics would be wide, not just necessarily about match day experience, but about what's happening with the finances at different clubs. You know, how different clubs are connected to, say, if they're connected to a men's club, like how exactly that looks like, what for those kind of conversations, those kind of like ownership things as well as you know, it is important if your pie is cold, so don't let anybody think that I'm not saying that. You know, those kind of issues are really important as well, so it's just about covering all those different bases. But yeah, this is totally in the plan. And just so you know, we do meet with the Premier League, we do meet with the EFL. The supporters reps do get the chance to go in and meet. In the EFL it's slightly different because, you know, there's a lot of clubs, you know, over 70 clubs, so we help assist pick depending on the different topics that are on the agenda. So that's one of our jobs within the EFL. The Premier League, they meet everybody because it's easier because it's a smaller group. But yeah, this is definitely in the plan. But like I say, it's all fairly new. So we're just, you know, trying to establish these conversations. And also we have to have an established network. We have to have enough groups in order to showcase that this is a genuine the fan activism that's happening, which it is. I know it is, but we've got to lay the groundwork.
Yeah. I suppose, like you said, it's not just we're part of it, Barmy Army are part of it, but other fan groups, you know, and there's plenty out there. If any of our members go out encouraging other fan groups to get involved as well is really important.
I think as well, it's really important for people to understand that everybody has to start somewhere. So it's not like you have to have a group that's got a massive membership and you've got a constitution and you've got accounts and stuff. One of my jobs is try to shape where you want to go, and support where you're trying to get to. So you could come onto the scene and want to be an atmosphere group, you know, you could, so like it's not restricted, and it's not like you'll be cut out for every sort of fan activism project and group is really important. So it's just a case of like you could have just started a social media Twitter handle and Instagram channel, other platforms are available, and then, you know, that can be the start of the supporters group. It doesn't have to be that you've got this big formal process. So I kind of, especially in the women's network, I would really encourage people, hey, don't be worried by it. If you've got an idea, and now I think the network has been brilliant at this, really encouraging people to come forward. So
well,
so yeah, it's important.
I've got a second question here. It sort of goes on to what you're saying about atmosphere, and I know the person who sent it, he knows who it is. But anyway, what are the FSA doing to try and grow the game, especially say if it comes to fan segregation or dedicated home and away stands across the league? Is it, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but would that, you know, if there are a group, some supporters of us, and I've spoken to other fan groups, that it's easier if you are all standing together, if you are all sitting together, and it's not that easy to do that in the women's game, especially as it's growing. You might not be able to buy a ticket where the Barmy Army are. So what do you think about things like that if they did start to appear in the women's game?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily for me to say one way or the other in terms of approving it or not. Realistically, it's down to the supporters. I mean, I think it depends as well which side of the fence that you're on, because some people go to the women's game because they can mix and they really love that. They really love, you know, being able to talk to lots of different supporters and for it to be calmer to some degree. But some people want that feeling of that divided fan base and stuff. So from an FSA point of view, it's not our core work at the minute to be involved in something like that necessarily. That will be down to the individual supporters groups. And like if our members in our network wanted to push conversations on that in terms of the FA, in terms of speaking to the FA, and it was agreed upon by the group, then we would go with the majority and we would, you know, I try and help support that. But at the minute, the main things that we're focusing on, because we're such a brand new network and we're so new, is like focusing on supporting the supporters to get some sort of structure in their groups, to start to establish relationships with the clubs, to try to upskill people, train people. That's really where the focus is at the minute, because sometimes you can't move on those things if you don't have a coordinated plan in the background. Because like it's very easy to be like, right, we want to do this, we want to do this, but you need to be able to provide the goods as well. You know, and there's so many skills within this women's network already. So for me, it's really exciting. It's about how do we all crisscross over, but also how do we look at good practice and look at ways in which things have been pushed forward in other areas. It's an interesting question, and it's interesting. You know, we've spoken about this before. And I know there is separation between different sports groups as to what's wanted. So it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, hey?
Yeah, for me anyway. I'll let you speak a bit, Deb. But at a neutral end, a home end, and an away end, perfect.
Yeah, because that kind of brings us into the next question. You can tell they've been submitted by the same person, can't you? Do you believe that we need to have those rivalries to have the women's game grow, or can the game grow as it currently stands with this everybody mixing together? Do we need to have separation as we would do in the men's game?
In order for it to grow, in my personal opinion, no, I don't think so, because it's just different. It's just different, but I can understand why some people might like that. And again, you know, from an FSA perspective, it's kind of like those rivalries will probably grow quite organically anyway. So as the supporter base grows, it will evolve. So what we see now, it might be different in a year's time because the supporter base might grow. So it's kind of, we can't necessarily dictate that. So even if we did do segregation, for example, would that look like somebody might think it might look in terms of rivalries and stuff? You know, it's kind of thinking about it that from that perspective as well. So, you know, one thing I really want to get over is that even with rivalries, one of the good things about this network, and even in the EFL and the Premier League and the National League, is that supporters are working together all the time as well. So for me, that is the main thing, is okay, we might have a rivalry on the pitch, but like for my work and for our network, we need to push those aside and be on board with each other, you know, and discussing things with each other and stuff, because this is one of the reasons for this network. It's just like there's a lot of common issues across the game, so how do we best work together? But I think, does it need to? I'm on the fence, really.
Yeah, I think rivalries on the pitch, isn't it? And I think we're working with, well, I don't mind me saying, but like Liverpool in the group, City are in the group. So I think City are a size, you know, a big network, big supporters club. So, you know, we're moving and we're doing things that are similar. So just because we might sing we hate City and Liverpool doesn't mean that they can't then go, like you said, to the boardroom and just, you know, hash things out that will benefit both of us.
Yeah,
because a strong Liverpool benefits us. You know, I love beating them, but I want to see good football.
It's a funny position to be in, isn't it? It's a funny position to be in, because when you do like traditional rivalries, like, well, never talk to them, you know. So it's like, yeah. So it just, I think the person that asked that question is like, what are they thinking when they talk about rivalries? You know, and you know, because it might look different. So it's an interesting question though, but I think it's all about it organically growing.
Yeah, this one might be more what you know. This definitely is an interesting question for me. What are the FSA potentially doing to hold clubs accountable when it comes to football pitches and facilities that are not fit for purpose? That's a really important one, I think, in the women's game, because pitches leads to matches postponed, leads to, say, not a good quality game that we want to see. So how are you maybe trying to help the fans in this way?
Yeah, so this was an interesting question for me. So just generally speaking, we have generic policy around improvement of facilities, because this isn't an issue that just touches the women's game. So realistically, we would try to sort of tap into some of those existing policies, and also like financial solidarity, it kind of taps into across the pyramid. So whilst we can sometimes get sidetracked by the gloss of the Premier League and some of the Championship, it's not necessarily like the rest of the pyramid isn't, basking in the glory of brilliant grounds and facilities. So from an FSA perspective, in terms of generic policy, we would probably tap into that a little bit more. But again, and people might want to hit me over the head when I say this again, but because we are such a new network, it's hopefully nobody wants to hit me over the head, that would be bad, but because it's such a new network, it's kind of like our members, you guys as network members, you get to try to push forward on some policy. So if you wanted to do some sort of campaign or try to push policy, that's where you guys sort of start to come in, specifically on the women's game. But in order to sort of like try to do that, I need to push it internally to get us constituted, which is what I'm doing. And I'm super hopeful because they can see the growing network, the current council, so they recognise the work that you guys are doing. So yeah, it's sort of a funny one, that, because it actually touches quite a few clubs, a few networks. So yeah, it's about pushing that, doing a
we've had a few postponements this year. One at home, but that was a weather-related one. We've had two that were pitch-related away. And I think the frustration that we've noticed now within the supporters group is the cost. That your match ticket, well, for one, we're struggling to get the refund for match tickets anyway from one particular club, but also the travel. So train tickets can't be refunded. We'd already paid for the bus because one got cancelled sort of 4 or 5 hours before kickoff. We were all on our way. And I think that's a frustration. And I know it's not unique to the women's game. But it feels like it's one more element that could erode a bit of goodwill, and it could erode people's belief and support in the game. Because we're going to be susceptible to the weather, and we did have times where there was a lot of rain falling in a short amount of time, but we just noticed the reaction was a bit stronger than I anticipated. I just put it down to one of those things you get as a football fan, but it's not unique to the women's game. And actually, I think that hearing that actually makes me think, this is a point we need to make to everybody. It's not just a case of, if it was the men's team, you'd get your money back. No. Actually, that's just because we're talking Manchester United, but we could be talking other clubs or other men's clubs where that's just not, it's not the case. You're not getting anything back.
I think as well on the rail travel. So we've done a lot of work in I genuinely, I'd love just to say football and it be all encompassing, but for the time being, in the men's side, we have been pushing and having meetings with the rail networks to say, you can't, it's not fair if something gets moved to then not allow a flexible ticket. So again, we were waiting for some follow-up on that conversation, but this would be the purpose. These kind of things would then be in the national network meetings for supporter reps. We would be bringing this sort of stuff up, and then they inform the meetings with the FA, so then we can hopefully help push the FA as well. But our CEO Kevin, he was in talks with the rail companies, and we were progressing in that conversation, and that would go for anybody that goes to the men's games as well. But at this moment in time, because everything is a bit of a standstill and we're just trying to see what happens, and nobody can really travel anyway, just an FYI for you guys, that's something that we would be working on. I think as well, one of the things that we sort of encourage the EFL to do in one of our structured dialogue meetings with them is, I can't remember which game it was, but a game got called off really last minute, and it was like really far apart, two teams really far apart. They did a promo video about how games get called off, so we could try and push the FA to do something similar in the women's game, so that people actually have an understanding as to how, because sometimes that's a problem. It's like games are called off, but no, supporters aren't really told why. They're not really told the steps why, and then everyone's like, hang on a minute, what's happened? So we could maybe take that into our next network meeting, actually, to see how these decisions get made.
Yeah, well, I think
things.
Yeah, I think things that, well, I remember when our games got called off, I think what supporters get irked about the most is the time. If they're told 24 hours in advance, it might be. But some games, people have already turned up and are outside the gate waiting to go in, and oh no, it's cancelled. And I think that's what irks a lot of people, in that they do think, well, at least the Premier League have to say it by a certain time. I think maybe over 24 hours.
I think it's interesting because in one respect, I think from a referee's perspective, they might be trying to allow enough time to see if it can go ahead. So it's it's counterintuitive in one sense, because like if people are traveling, then you kind of want to know, don't you, right? And then do something else with your day. But I do get the gripe. And this is a similar issue across the board as well. And it can cause a lot of issues too. If you've travelled halfway across the country only to find, and then you have to travel back in snow or something, or terrible rain, like from a supporter's perspective, it's that bit of communication that would really help to understand. But they're just some of the things that we've been working on. And so this is where I want the women's network not just to be, oh, you're the women's network, you're like on your own. You feed in, like every other network feeds into the general issues across the game, and then hopefully we're pushing from a lot of different bases to say, well, no, you should provide football fans flexible tickets. Hotels, if you booked your travel for across the season, well, if you've got tickets, you should be able to say.
And that taps in, I think, just jumping in there with late rearrangements. I know it's not a point that anybody's raised here, but we've had games, and everybody, I know this happens, but in the women's game, there seems to be a sense that we can rearrange fixtures with a moment's notice, and it doesn't really matter. I know from experience in the men's games, well, particularly the Premiership, there will, and the TV companies obviously dictate this, there will be a period of time where you will know when that is. And granted, people will have travel booked, but we had a cup game against City, an FA Cup game against City that was, we knew it was going to be moved. We knew it was going to be moved. It didn't get announced till late. And we were aware of people who had flights booked, hotels booked. And again, it's those things that are really avoidable and really seem to say to the fans, we don't care. You're not that important. And I think we've spoken to you about it as well. We'd almost like there to be a period of 2 weeks longer, ideally, say, you cannot move a game once you're in that 2-week window, because you've got people who, if it suddenly becomes a late kickoff on a Sunday, that might impact on people. If they're doing a Monday to Friday job, that might impact on people going to work on the Monday morning. There are games where we've had those shifts and it's made it impossible for certain people to get to. We had, I think we spoke to you about the game last season, the first season, 2 seasons ago now, I suppose, against Arsenal, Nat, the Conti Cup, the semi, where we were waiting, and all that was happening was the train prices were going up and up and up, and there was less and less notice. And in the end, the people that could go ended up paying a lot more for their train tickets than they would have paid had it been announced when the other semi-final was announced. So that's another thing that you can just see, and the sense we're picking up is that the fans.
Women's football doesn't matter.
Yeah. And I know we're not looking to you for a fix it kind of thing, but it's just one more of those things that it gets under people's skin. And what I'd hate to happen is for people to say, oh, well, they'll change fixtures, I don't need to bother going, I'll watch it on the FA player. But that's not what we want. We want people in the grounds, because that's where we make the best atmosphere. Yeah.
I mean, I think on those, this is where I think the the value of the network is important, because so you're not the only group that have said this to me, and so if we can collectively go and say, hang on a minute, this is, and feed that supporter voice in, then maybe that changes the narrative. I mean, like, I have to manage people's expectations, because, and you guys will know this as well, in the sense of sometimes football turns at a very slow pace, but I'm really determined to try to make a difference. You know, and the women's game has such an opportunity to get their supporter engagement right from the off, because some of the clubs in the men's side are not doing that. So we want to try to lead by example, but also affect change and make sure that supporters are involved. Because, like, why would a club not want to talk to their main stakeholder? So, you know, that's what the position that we come in from. But yeah, I totally hear you. There's some really, like, aggravating things that are happening in the women's game, with fixtures and clashes and cancelling.
I suppose the one bonus for clubs at the moment is when we do get back to football, they'll have a grace period where we're all just so happy that we don't care what it is, whatever time it is, we're going whenever we can get back to games. I think I'm jumping in next. What are the FSA doing when it comes to football clubs? And I think this question's aimed from the perspective of men's clubs, but so men's clubs that have a women's team as well. What are you doing about those clubs who may be pulling funding or just underfunding historically their women's teams?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one for me as well, because, like, it depends locally my natural inclination is we want to help activate and mobilize locally. So it's not necessarily us always leading the voice, it's you guys leading the voice locally. So, like, I would try and work with individual groups to get a better sense of what's happening or what their perspective is. But again, like with the crowd thing, you've got a split opinion here, really. So some people in the women's game believe that women's clubs need to be standalone, be sustainable, not lean on men's clubs for all this money and all this funding, because, as we know, in history has taught us, often the women's club is the first to get chopped, even if they're the more successful side of the club. So you've got those people, and then you've got people, say, in your position, your supporters club, where the men's team are funding you, they have looked after you and stuff. So I think in terms of a network, it's again, we're led by our members, so it sort of depends on how you guys want to play it and what you do. You know, and almost like some of you would be in the position of why bite the hand that feeds you, so we'd have to get over issues like that. I think with some of the cases this person that your members mentioned about Liverpool and Birmingham, you know, there has been a lot of press about these things, and sometimes we need to sort of take a stand back and actually sort of understand whether the club might need a little bit of help as well. So all the clubs are working in a odd environment as well, to some degree. So one of the things that the FSA does is club development, and I think a lot of the women's clubs would be in line for some of that work, to sort of see how they run and have a bit of support. You know, because some of the figures coming out of the women's game are worrying as well, like, so the amount of losses and stuff. So I suppose it just depends in this person's mind, like, what they think of the pull. It's not as simple as they're pulling funding. There might be a whole level of complexities. In my opinion, the women's game should just be completely funded, and, you know, we should see the same levels as the men's, but, you know, we know it's not that simple. So yeah, again, it depends on, like, the membership, the network,
because obviously at the moment COVID's going to throw that into even bigger disarray. And clubs that perhaps didn't have the opportunity to fund their women's team as well as they would like might have even less opportunity now. And that's not through the lack of trying. That's just symptomatic of the situation. And every club will be hit by it in some respect. You'll have your bigger clubs who can swallow it to some point, but there are, I'm sure you'll know, you're aware, there are clubs that will possibly go to the wall following this situation. So yeah, that question, I guess, changes a little bit. The sentiment behind it changes a little bit with COVID and the situation that will bring with it. But
I think as well as this, where is your touch point? So say if you're a supporter of the Premier League, one of the Premier League clubs, like, is it the Championship? Is it when those clubs start to fail? Because, you know, we've had a Bury situation, the Bury situation happened. So it's like, because football really, it needs some serious regulation reform in order to try to run more sustainably and stuff, which is one of the bigger campaigns that the FSA is working on at the minute. But so it's like, where's your touch point? Like, where's your red line? Is it, once the Championship club goes because they can't sustain anymore, which, having seen what's happening in COVID, like, I don't think we can really fully understand the scale of what the impacts. And, you know, for a lot of like supporters at varying different levels of the game, it's worrying. So yeah, it's interesting to sort of see like where your red line is. Like, all right, okay, when they go, then, you know, but for a lot of people that was Bury. So, you know, but that's triggered a lot of reviews. But, you know, should it be at the sake like that should it be at the sake of a club? Feels uncomfortable. More than uncomfortable, actually. It was super sad to sort of see how that had happened.
It's very close to my heart. They're 2 miles down the road here, and I know a lot of their fans, and even as a casual observer, it's still, it cuts very, very deep.
Yeah. This is where fan activism is so important, to try to like push through regulation, push through salary caps and things within the game overall, to try to help affect change and like protect the pyramid that we have.
Definitely. And I think we've touched on sort of a bit of everything of what you do, fan activism. This is what like the FSA is about. If our fans feel like hurt by things, or, you know, facilities, pitches, cancelled fixtures, then the FSA are there to help us, and we're there to help make change. And so there's another thing that really irks our fans, the biggest thing in my opinion, because we talked about the cancelled fixtures one. Referees, the standards in the women's game. I know the FA have recently come out and said that the standards are improving, which I don't doubt they are, but I think they said it was something like 90% success, and I will, even they can show me the figures, I'll categorically deny that. A lot of our players came out after the Reading, the Katie Zellum handball, and said against the FA and said that there needs to be change. Casey Stoney comes out and says it regularly. Is there something that the fans can do to improve the standard, or the FSA can help us?
Yeah, I think on this one, it's whose responsibility is it really? So the FA do have a really thorough provision on how to monitor, review and performance review the refs. So it's a case of like and the clubs also after every game have the opportunity to add in and say, right, this is what we think about the refs' performance and stuff. So, you know, unfortunately referees are in a very difficult position sometimes, that whatever they do, you know, the good performances aren't talked about. It's just the really bad ones like the handballs or whatnot. So it's sort of a difficult opinion. And like, does that affect the game? I think the question was about, you know, the game not being taken seriously. But, you know, if we look across the men's game as well, there's a lot of complaints about referees too. So, and it's not, I wouldn't say that should diminish anything to do with the women's game. It's just people's views on referees. But the FA does have this really quite like thorough process that they do, that the clubs can play into. So from a supporter perspective, is that something, how high on the agenda is that? Like, is there other things that you could maybe feed into from a supporter's perspective that might actually help the supporters more? But that's not to discount this question, because, you know, like, if you're watching and you're thinking, oh my goodness. Although my one thing is if you've not done a referees course, go and do one, because it's so hard. It is so hard to make those second decisions are incredibly difficult. So
I think you're right. Referees do have almost an impossible task. I often ask myself the question, who'd want to be? I think they're a bit like goalkeepers. When they do their job the way they should, no one talks about them. When they make a mistake, then it's highlighted. But I think one of the reasons why having an impact, women's game not being taken seriously, is after the handball that wasn't, after the Reading game, I think on the Monday morning I was looking through the BBC Sport webpage, and they had a lot of weekend sport moments, just highlights, stories, and there were some video clips, and it was the only women's football clip was, look at this appalling decision. Yeah. And yeah, I was there, I saw it, and I couldn't believe it. People are watching it, and then there's comments on it. And obviously the comments, you get in your sexist comments that you'll get with anything, unfortunately. But if people think that's acceptable and that's standard, and that's the moment that's being highlighted, it's a real shame that we forget the 89 minutes around it, where actually it wasn't the best of games, but come on, we had a penalty save, so thank you very much. That gets forgotten about. We scored a decent goal. So there are bits that get forgotten because that's the bit you highlight. And I know that we've got VAR now, so to an extent in the men's game, that won't happen. You'll have the questions after it. But my concern when I see those moments and they're highlighted is people think, oh, well, they haven't got good refs. It doesn't really matter. And I hate that for the women's game. Because I want it to be held to the same account as the men's game, because the players deserve it. They don't put in any less effort. They deserve better. And we saw our players after that game and how devastated they were. And to know that was so avoidable, it hurt us. It really hurt us. And I'd hate for the game to be ridiculed, not taken seriously, not given the opportunity, because it's not a great look for funders and sponsors. So
no, I do. I appreciate that point. I appreciate the point on the sense that if, and this is where the media really have to step up and sort of do a whole range of coverage, and it's not just one story. But I think that is happening. The likes of Susie Rack, Jen O'Neill, who's worked tirelessly in the game, and Katie White, like all these people are starting to, give more exposure to the women's game, which is awesome. But I do appreciate that point. I do think it's a little bit of both, though. It's kind of like, so in the EFR, I know they've run referee sort of, not webinars, but evenings, just to sort of like, for the refs to say, hey, right, okay, this is it from our perspective, or they talk through certain things. And, because like everybody has a responsibility. Just it's very easy to be like, well, I would have done that decision, so like I sort of see that side of it as well, and it is a ridiculously hard job to do. However, we do want, it's never to say that you wouldn't want a higher standard of refereeing, or you want that to happen and grow in the women's game. It's like the players, you want them to be more technically gifted, you want them to strive to be better. So I don't see why we wouldn't include the referees with that. But in terms of what a supporter does on it, what's the best way? So you as a group might decide to support, go and approach the club and sort of say like, right, how could we help support development, or how can we understand better like how refs are picked, or whatever the question is, or whatever your members might think they'd quite like to know. But again, it's like we've got to manage our expectations as well. So yeah, but I do appreciate the point on like you don't want it to be down like ridiculed and be the only image, because actually 89 minutes is great. So yeah, shouldn't be reflective. That shouldn't be the reflection from the women's game for sure.
Yeah, definitely. We've got the last question, I think, and we're going to try and end on a positive note, because we're thinking about when we can finally get back to games, when we are allowed back into grounds. And I know there's a whole load of questions about when. We can't answer those. We can't answer whether it's going to be just home fans. Do you believe, or do you understand that there may be some restrictions on facilities? And in particular, I'll give you the example. They won't thank me. I won't name them. But the question came from a woman who said, if I can't go to the toilet, I can't go to the game. And actually it got me thinking, we're going to have young children that come to games. You can't say to them, you can't go to the toilet from the amount of time it takes you to leave your house, to get to the ground, to watch the game, to go home. Obviously people are asking about food and drink as well. Any indication whether that's something that we would be able to do, or is it you walk into the ground, you watch the game, you go home again?
I would think that there would be provision, but again, we've got there's nothing that's been said necessarily at the minute, because I think they were so focused, sadly not with the women's game, are looking to the following season, but on the men's side they're just looking to get the games played, right, you know, and having them behind closed doors. So I think realistically we would have to follow any government guidance, and then the DCMS would submit a report, or release a report that would say, right, this is the provisions that you would have to do, whether it's limited in numbers as well. And this is where the women's game is interesting, because would the women's game be allowed supporters in the ground quicker because it's less numbers, in which case then I would assume at this current moment, but it's changing day to day, you would have to have provisions in place. You know, and it's even for what happens with the fans that still need to shield, or the more vulnerable fans, and there's so much that they would have to consider. But equally, the women's game, along with the many other clubs in the EFL and the National League community-owned clubs, they rely on that money. So, you know, I think there would be a will to try to get things back, where fans could actually go. But we've been asked to be involved in like a consultation around this across the board. So on Project Restart, we've been asked. So, you know, it's not happened yet, but like fans hope we will be pushing for the fans' voice to be heard in any of those talks, because it's super important that we get to have a say as well, seeing as they're talking about us going back into the stadium. So yeah, but like, you know, it's hard, but safety is what matters first and foremost, right? So that I would imagine that there would be restrictions or provisions put in place to try to limit. So yeah. But it's day by day, it changes, and so that's why it's hard to give an answer to that. But I appreciate the person that asked it, and I really appreciate all these questions, by the way. They're amazing. It's good to talk through. So thanks to your members for submitting them.
Yeah, it's member led, so we'll submit. You submit a question, we'll ask it. But Deb, I don't want to stick it on your toes. One last question that I came up with in my head. There's a move now to get the women's game more professional, get it on telly, get it in the papers, get it like the men's game, say, get it on Sky, get it on BT. Do you think that we would be still involved, or do you think they'll just do to us, if you understand what I mean?
I understand what you mean.
So deal with it.
No, I hope we will be involved, but again, this is a case of pushing to be part of the conversations, pushing, you know, and I know that the Premier League have some of the reps have had communications with Sky and BT in the past, so, you know, we would potentially look to sort of talk to them as a network, but ideally we want to be involved in anything that can affect supporters, and also help, you know, in terms of helping be, you know, a sort of pivot point for other groups, you know, doing educational pieces, working with the community. There's lots of different ways a supporters group can get involved in things. So ideally, we want to be involved in everything. The method of doing that, sometimes we can be blocked, but if one way doesn't work, then we'll try and find another way, and we'll keep pushing and we'll keep growing. And the main thing about this is the bigger our network, the more people that are working together and actually saying, hey, we're a network, hey, we're doing this, hey, we're doing that, and we can showcase all this great work that you're doing and we're doing as a group, the better it is, the louder the voice. It's hard to start to ignore. And I think at the start of it, when we had 5, you know, groups, it was hard to ignore. So the FA were communicating with us when we were 5, so imagine if we're 30. So excited to keep growing.
Yeah, it's all the pyramid, it's all the women's pyramid, isn't it? It's not just about WSL, or even if the TV deals with the WSL, how does that then affect the National League, I suppose? How does a TV deal affect all tiers of football?
Yeah, definitely.
We're done there, Nat. Anything else you want to throw at Deb?
No, just make sure 5th of September we're all together.
If you ever want
no pressure.
a fan to be your guinea pig, please take that. Please.
Call me.
I think obviously we're all just very keen, and our members are saying the same thing. When I know nobody knows the answer, and we've got Premier League back now, so that feels like a forward step, but it's not in terms of getting the fans back, and just so many questions and no sight of any answers. But yeah, we seem to think that 6th of September is the start of the season. So Nat's already put it in her diary, because that's when she's going to a game, according to her, aren't you, Nat?
Yeah.
Deb, thank you so much for joining us. I know that when Nat and I first met you, we weren't sure. We were a little bit sceptical. We've said we were a bit dubious. We weren't sure. It came at a difficult time for us as well. And I think we were expecting a bit of flack over situations, and actually we both came away from that meeting thinking, this is brilliant, we've got to be a part of this, we've got to be on board. And I think ever since, Nat's been really influential in terms of talking to other supporters groups, and as much as we keep our rivalries, I think we're working together off the pitch, but we're working together off the pitch, but we're rivals on it. So I think that's the way we try to do it. But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for answering some of these questions. I'd love to do one of these again in the near future. I'm sure there'll be a whole load of other questions, and also if people have got more of an idea of who and what the FSA do, then definitely there might be a whole different set of questions. But thank you so much for joining us, Nat. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you to anybody who's watched this, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.